All right, recording is in progress. Welcome. I'm Veronica at Stash, and we're talking blocking. So I have a lot of fun things that I want to go over today. I got your questions and made some great notes, and I think you're going to get something out of it. I may not be able to cover everything, but I'm going to do my best within 1 hour. So the first topic I wanted to go over was blocking supplies. I got a lot of questions about what supplies to use, and I really want to demystify some of that. I'm going to take about 5 minutes to talk about it. So one of the first things you need when you're blocking is a basket or a bucket. So some people like to have more portable things with handles. We do sell these at Stash. Another option for your blocking bucket is a good old dish basin from the dollar store. Those work really well too. And those are good for smaller things. Smaller things would include like lightweight shawls, hats, mittens, socks. It's nice to put them in a slightly smaller container when you're washing, so you have to use less water for wet blocking. Another thing that I use is I just go right into a sink if it's a medium weight sweater, like with worsted weight or lighter. And if it's a really like big piece, like maybe like a 3/4 length sweater or tunic, I'll even just do it right in my tub. So yeah, for wet blocking, you want to have that vessel, and it just has to be something you're willing to get a little bit of soap on. That's what I want to talk about next. What are you putting in that water? First of all, for blocking, your water should be like room temperature. If it's too warm, you could open up too many fibers and they could unintentionally start felting. And if it's too cold, you're just going to shock the darn stuff. So you're really looking for that kind of like tepid, lukewarm water temperature. And what I like to use, we sell this at Stash, and it's a no rinse. So what you do, it's soak. Comes in a lot of different like smells and non-smells. We also use Eucalan. This would last you a long time. I have one at home and I barely use any. I'll demo how to use it. It's called a no rinse because you just add some to the water and get it frothed up a little bit. And then you basically drain the water off after it's finished blocking. You don't have to rinse it out. It will leave a nice scent behind. I actually also use little packets, like portable packets of this when I'm traveling, because I can even wash something in a sink, like in an emergency situation in a hotel room or in my Airbnb. Other people use it for delicates too. So it's really brilliant stuff. It saves some labor because you don't have to rinse out the soap or anything like that. And it's very gentle. So I really encourage you to find something to wash your blocking with that's like just like a no rinse. You just drain it out and the little bubbles just do their thing. So for wet blocking, those are two important things to get started. The other tools that we like to use for wet blocking are blocking mats. So some of you may be familiar with this kind of setup. We have them in our kids' leg rooms. There's like exercise mats made out of this stuff. This is a Knitter's Pride specific one that we sell. But if you don't have access to this, you can always check things like Walmart, Superstore. They have similar blocks. They tend to be a bit bigger. The smaller ones are nicer because you can interlock them into the shape that you need. So if you have an unusual shaped garment or shawl, you can kind of like configure it so it's not necessarily just a big rectangle. I'm a big fan of these. I'm going to show you something else that I use for blocking. If you have it around, I know it's so beautiful. It's 2 inches thick. This is literally a piece of styrofoam from Home Depot. It comes in like sheets this wide and 8 feet tall. So they're meant to like, wedge perfectly into walls and things. Very easy to cut. And I like it because I can use it over and over again. It's lightweight. I store it in my closet, but there are size limitations to it. I use that one more for like the occasional sweater and things like that to keep it in place. But shawls tend not to fit on it. And I would use something like this instead. So those are some supplies. That's for pinning things on. I'll get to that. Then I want to talk about the pins. So we carry T-pins. T-pins. Is it going to focus? T-pins. These are cocoa knit T-pins. There's also Knitter's Pride T-pin. You can also find T-pins at a lot of fabric stores, craft stores. So Knitter's Pride T-pins are a really nice one. What I would say is you can find them in a lot of places, but you have to make sure that they are for blocking lace garments or that they're stainless steel. I once used inexpensive T-pins that of questionable origin, and what had happened was is they were not stainless steel, and they actually left rust marks in my wet blocking. I don't want that to happen to you. It was a tragedy. It was impossible to get out. It was like one of those cream, like Aran style sweaters. So you have to make sure that you do use quality T-pins that are stainless steel. If they say that they're for blocking, that's kind of ideal. T-pins are used for a few different things. But I remember using them in like junior high when I was pinning the frogs open and stuff. Anyways, that's my association. So those are individual pins that we use to work on specific areas of our wet blocking. Some other options are knit blockers. And these are kind of like the equivalent of 1, 2, 3, 4. Looks like about between 4 and 8. I'm going to zoom in here. You can, there we go, up in the corner here. Between 4 and 8 pins sticking out. What that does is that guarantees a really nice straight line and kind of does the work 4 or 8 times faster for you. I'm not going to lie, I don't use these, but some people love them. So it's kind of personal preference. I tend to use individual T-pins. I just feel like I have more control. And I'm going to be demoing how to use those in a bit. So those are some blocking materials. I'm going to reach over and show you one more. I don't want to open this up because if anyone has one, Knitter's Pride Lace Blocking Wire Kit. So what this has is a few different lengths of like a nice flexible stainless steel wire. It comes with T-pins and let's see, stainless steel wire. And yeah, it comes in 95 centimeters and 50 centimeters, and then some flexi wires as well. And so basically, these are more for stretching out things. I'm going to show you this picture too, because I'm such a nerd. Can you see that lace being blocked on the piece here? So that's for getting like a really even set of points. And you just kind of like capture so many stitches and like weave it through and then pin down the wire. So it can really cut down on the amount of work you have to do when you're pinning things down. So lace blocking is different from regular blocking. And I'm going to touch on that while we're doing some blocking. So other supplies that you're going to want to have on hand are an old towel. Whenever I have to retire a towel from my house, you know, maybe it gets bleach or this case paint on it and things. I just give it a wash and put it in with my knitting supplies so that I have what I need. I like to have 2 or 3 normally, nice large ones for sweaters and shawls. And I also use towels for steam blocking, which I'm going to demo too. So yeah, you're going to want to have your towel handy. Other options for steam blocking, you want an ironing board or the kind of ironing board that either goes on a table or a full ironing board, and an iron. Your iron does not have to be pretty. In fact, I'm going to show you how rotten mine is. This is, I just hit my mic. Am I okay? Okay, great. So if you take a look, this iron is horribly filthy. That's totally okay. In fact, if you ever have an iron that gets kind of ruined and you can't get the goop off of it, it can actually be retired to be an iron specifically for blocking because the iron never actually touches your knitting. So if it looks scorched or anything, it doesn't matter. So feel free to grab any old iron. And we don't even put water in it. So if you have an iron that leaks and you're like, it's garbage. No, it's not. It's your blocking iron. Yeah. Wow. Right? Reduce, reuse, recycle. So those are some of the materials. Other materials include balloons for hats. I'm going to go over that. And sometimes I just round up things around the house to put my balloon on, and I'll be showing you that. So sometimes you need things with a small diameter that stand. So those are some blocking supplies. Whew, easy breezy. I think it hit 7 minutes there. So I want to jump right in and talk about wet blocking. So some of the questions that we got in the feedback form when you registered were things like, one of the common ones was, when should I wet block versus when should I steam block? and I'm going to show you some options. I like to wet block personally whenever possible on items that are worsted weight down to a lace weight. And I'll give you some caveats in a little bit. But in general, I find wet blocking really does the best job of soaking through all of the fibers in your piece, getting any dirt or grit or residual stuff off of your fibers. And then it lets you really push it around. And so it's the most malleable when you wet block. And I'm going to demo that one. Steam blocking is more appropriate if the fiber is very delicate. So for example, you don't, like if silk gets wet, it becomes very fragile. And so if you wet block and pull and wrench on something that has silk in it, there is a slight chance you could inadvertently tear a stitch, which is terrifying. You do all this work and then all of a sudden you ruin it by being too aggressive. So steam blocking can be for more delicate things like that. Steam blocking is also more appropriate with chunkier weights. So I'll give you an example here. This is a neck cowl that I made and I want to block it, but sometimes the issue with chunky weight is that it could take so long for it to dry that it's, it's kind of prohibitive for the project. So sometimes I kind of have to make an executive decision because this kind of sits on the fence. If I really had a lot of problems with my color work, I would probably wet block this and accept that it's going to take 5 to 6 days to dry. But because my color work is fairly even with just a couple bumps in it, I'm going to steam block it today and show you the difference. Another example of when you would want to steam block. This is a cowichan style piece and it is so thick. Like in the color work area, it's a solid 1/2 inch. I once wet blocked a cowichan style sweater that had a coffee stain on it and it took literally 2 weeks to dry. So I don't recommend that to anybody unless you're doing what I was doing, which was trying to save a garment. Steam blocking works really well with the super thick, super bulky. I avoid washing super bulky unless it's like, again, a salvage mission. Okay. Another example of steam blocking is, here's a Pikachu hat my stepmom made. Isn't it so sweet? This is made out of acrylic for my daughter. And wet blocking does not work with acrylic. I mean, it does a little bit, but I'm going to show you how to steam block your acrylic and it's going to blow your mind. So let's get started. I want to start with wet blocking. So I'm not going to use these supplies. Oh, I forgot to talk about soft blocking. I'll mention that later. I'm just making some room here because what I want to do is I want to freshen up this hat. It's my husband's favorite hat. I don't know if it's probably a void of blackness, but it's a 4x4 rib and it's just all stretched out and it lost all of its like happiness. So I'm going to be wet blocking this just to show you some tips and tricks. And I'm going to talk about wet blocking things like sweaters and giving some demos on parts of it too. How am I doing, Heather? Everything good? Okay, great. So let's bring this up. You might not be able to see it, but what I have here, I have a bin half filled with water. You think you can point it down? Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I have a bin half filled with water. It's room temperature, it's not too cold. And I'm going to be using soak, and this one is lacy. It's a very pretty smell. I'm not going to put very much, literally like a teaspoon. Oh, this one here has it. It was leaking. I assumed it had no thing, but it does. Oh, the joys of live Zoom and watching me try to open something. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, I got it here. So you can measure it if you want, but I'm just literally like a squirt of it. So that really goes a long way. I'm just frothing it up a little bit to get the bubbles on the go. If your water's too cold, it's not going to bubble very much. This one's doing pretty good. There. So all I'm doing is I am submerging this in. So one of the reasons wool is so warm is because of the barbs that are all over the fiber. It's covered in all these little barbs and crimps, and that captures heat. It also captures the warm air or air. So your garment will float unless you try to squish out gently. I'm just doing this. I'm not like twisting it. I don't want to damage it. I'm just trying to make sure it doesn't float to the surface. There. So how long does this have to soak, you ask? Well, I can tell you that. I have kind of like a 20-minute minimum, and you don't want it in there for any more than 3 or 4 hours. If you forget about your blocking, you know, like you wander back into the kitchen, you look in the sink and you're like, oh, right, I have a shawl in there. You want to just carefully get it out as soon as possible, because kind of like anything that sits in water too long, it can be waterlogged. And you're just going to want to handle it more carefully if it's been in there for too long. And I mean like 3 or 4 hours too long. So while that soaks for about 15, 20 minutes, I'm going to talk about steam blocking with you. How's that sound? Okay, I'm going to move that over here. So that guy's soaking, and I'm going to pull up a different table for steam blocking here. Moving my things around. So somebody said that they were very apprehensive about wet blocking items because they were worried colors would run. And a situation like that would be, I mean, this is too chunky, but when you have a high contrast color next to a dark color or white next to a real bright one, people are like, well, I've done all of this knitting and then I blocked this sweater and the colors all ran. So what can you do to prevent that? This is the sweater that I knit. Isn't it pretty? And I was very concerned about the white being next to this burgundy, especially because burgundies are a very saturated dye. And what I actually did was not blocking related. What I did is this was knit out of Briggs and Little Heritage. And then the burgundy was a Briggs and Little Heritage that had been dyed by, I believe, Georgian Bay into this lovely, like, kind of like tonal burgundy. And I actually took the skein and opened the skein. I left all of the ties on the skein. And what I actually did is I pretty much washed the skein before I knit with it. And that way there was an opportunity for the excess dye to continue to get off of that fiber so that it didn't later transfer when I actually blocked the garment. So yeah, so what I did is it slowed down the process. It's a bit of a bummer because you have to let it soak in very lukewarm, cool water with a little bit of soak, no rinse on it. And then you have to let it hang and air dry until it's fully dry before you can knit with it. So if you think that making a gauge is boring and slows you down, try washing your yarn first. But if you're ever like really worried about that kind of bleed, it's a step that will like help you sleep at night. And I want you to be able to sleep at night. So yeah, and it didn't bleed at all. And normally it's very common for a little bit of color to come out, you know, of even a skein you're washing or a garment that you're blocking. And it doesn't mean that the fibers around it are necessarily going to draw in that excess dye. But if it is over the top, whites and creams in particular can be, you know, the scariest areas to work with. So if you are doing any kind of color work with like that kind of high contrast, you may want to wash that fiber first very gently, let it completely air dry, and then wind it up to knit with. Isn't that pretty? Yeah. And then I wet blocked this. Totally fine. So I just wanted to talk about that question. I want to talk about steam blocking. So with steam blocking, what we're trying to do is make a garment that has been knit up and looks pretty okay. And we want to take it to the next level and give it like that really nice finish without having to soak it for the entire like 20 minutes to an hour and a half. And so, for example, with this guy here, what I have is my piece. And if you take a look, I'm going to try and move it up close. I don't know if you can see it here, but it's a little bit bumpy. So it has a little, like, there's a bit of questionable areas with my larger floats in the back. And I just want it to sit like even more flat and snap that color work in place. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using an iron, but my iron is never going to touch it. And my iron has no water in it. You're like, but steam blocking, Veronica. I'll get to it. And my iron needs to be cranked to like broil, usually linen and cotton. So empty iron, set on super high, and your item can be placed down. Remember, you're going to be working with a hot iron and steam. And then what you're doing is you're taking your towel. I'm only going to use a corner of it because I don't want it to, I need to use it for something else. And what you're going to do normally is, like if I have one of those hand towels would be ideal for this little project, I would get it completely wet. But in this situation, I'm only going to get a corner of it wet. And I'm going to reuse water because I don't want to go to a sink. So what I'm doing, if you can see, I'm squeezing out the water. It needs to be so wet that it feels nice and wet, but it's just not dripping. Okay? So it's wet, but it's not like soaking the floor around me. This doesn't have to be a mess, but it's definitely like, a wet towel. And you're placing the wet towel over the area that you want blocked. And now you're just going to put your iron on it, like 15, 30 seconds. And what you're doing is the iron is activating the cold water, creating steam very close to the stitches. Am I smooshing it around? No. Am I putting pressure on it? No. I'm just lifting it up. That is freaky hot. Do not touch it. Okay, don't burn yourself. And you place it down again. For this one, I'm not really trying to steam the ribbing too much because that makes my ribbing flare out when I want my ribbing to be nice and tight. I'm just kind of focusing on the center part. Look at that steam. Can you see that? That's showing up on the camera. Magical. Okay. Very carefully. Oh yeah, it's already better than the other side. So now I would flip it over, get to the other side again. I don't want to do the ribbing because the ribbing might flare out. I want that ribbing to stay crunched in. So I never block my ribbing if at all possible, especially with steam blocking. Now, the good thing about steam blocking or any kind of blocking is that if it goes really sideways, you can always wet block it and squish it back into place. So there is a way to undo some blocking. But if I was mashing on it, I would be flattening my stitches and that would be sad. So the towel is gently steaming most of the surface without creating that flat edge. So, if I was going to cut my yarn right now, it would still be a nice circle. But if I like push down with the iron, I would kind of cap off the top of that puffy little stitch. Now, I don't want to seam. So now I'm going to open it completely opposite so that, my blocking steam seam is right in the middle. You can reposition or re-wet your towel if you ever have to. Now, oh yeah, that looks nicer already. So the other thing, this is now very damp when I touch it. It smells very sheepy, tells me you're doing it right. Sometimes if you're still getting puckering with your color work, this is pro tip level, okay? This isn't basic level. If you're like, oh, my color work still has a weird thing going on in it, you can actually turn it inside out. And you can steam block the inside. And I like to kind of push out a little bit. I don't know if you can see me doing that. I like to steam block the inside of my color work to give it that extra bit of help to be a nice perky little lovely even stitches. So sometimes this is an opportunity for you to fix short floats. And I am going to move it outward a little. I'm not pushing on it. I'm just moving outward a little bit to coax those floats to be longer. And that can sometimes help a pucker if you end up with a pucker in your color work, because, you know, your color work's all fine and dandy. And then one evening you pick it up while you're like pissed about something. You read the news maybe. And all of a sudden your color work gets tighter than it should be. And this can be one of your opportunities to block it out. Well, that'll block out. This is that example. There's my steam blocking. Now, this is going to be piping hot. And then once something is steam blocked, you actually want to lay it somewhere safe to cool down and dry. It won't take like the full 24 to 48 hours to dry, but you want to give it like technically like, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours. So you can't just immediately wear it. It really feels like a soggy mitten right now. So I'm going to leave it inside out, and I'm just going to lay it flat to dry. Normally I would lay it flat on another towel, but I only brought one towel with me in perfect foresight. So I'm trying to do double duty. Do you think it's been 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes on this thing? Ish? Okay. So I'm going to demo blocking this guy too. So this is an example of it being super thick. If you ever make a Cowichan style sweater out of like 6-strand roving, we use the stuff from Custom Woolen Mills to make that style of sweater. Those old like white buffalo, it's really weird, super soft roping basically. And it looks so much better when it's blocked. It's still gonna be very rigid if you knit like, this was knit with like an 8 mil maybe, and it could have been knit with a 15 mil easily. So it's very tight, your treats aren't gonna fall out of it, or if it's a jacket, it's gonna keep the wind out. And you're just doing the same thing. You're just making sure that towel is nice and damp without being dripping wet. Place it on top. Give it a steam. So another thing about color bleed is that sometimes people think that the color is bleeding during steam blocking or wet blocking because they can see some of the blue, for example, inside of the white. That's not, it's probably not bleeding. It's probably just some of the fuzz and fiber intermingling and laying on top of it. And that's a little bit of a different problem there. So for example, it can sometimes look like blue, maybe bleeding here. That's literally some fuzz I just need to tidy up. I'm gonna flip this puppy over. Oh, this one smells super sheepy. There's no mistaking this for acrylic, I'll tell you. Smells like a sheep just went for a run in the April rain and came in to cuddle up with me. Sounds pleasant, but it's really, really a sheepy smell. There we go. So I've just really like tidied that up a little bit. Okay, I want to show you another form of steam blocking. So I put this hat in just because I am actually going to talk about hat blocking right now. So we're going to pretend I wet block this. And the reason we're going to pretend is because I actually brought it to demo acrylic blocking, and wet blocking is completely pointless. But someone asked, well, how do you block your hats? Usually, I often will wet block them and lay them flat. This ribbed one, definitely, and I'm going to show you that. But if you have a really nice hat that has color work in it, or a little bit of open work or lace work, you really do want to wet block it and kind of stretch it out just a little. So this hat is a little tight because the color work on the inside is a little deceiving, and it's taken the stretch away. And I really want to showcase this. I don't know if I'll put it on. This is my tragedy. Sorry, guys. So I wanted to fit a little less tight here. And I am going to steam block that. Oh, I'm going to show you how to do it on a balloon. So what you do is you wet block it for like 20, 30 minutes. take it out. I'm going to show you how to remove the excess water from it. And so let's just pretend this is nice and damp. And what you want to do is you want to get a balloon. Now, this is the rookie mistake. We blow our balloons up far too much. So the hat becomes gigantic by the time we get it on the balloon. So I'm really aiming for something that's going to be about the size of the head that I want, but maybe a little smaller. So yeah, don't make that rookie mistake. Don't blow your balloon up too much. But this is a lovely shape because what it's going to do is it's going to stretch out the top part and it's going to leave room for the ribbing to not be stretched. So let's pretend this is wet. I wiggle it on. I'm trying to make sure this bottom is fairly centered. And now I'm going to push it down. And then that's where this crazy item comes in. We're going to put it on that. And then you're going to coax in your ribbing so that the ribbing isn't being stretched, but the Pikachu is. There we go. And then I would let that dry for a solid 24 to 48 hours. Okay, there we go. Some people will even just turn it upside down, but I find it falls over and things. I like to set mine on a glass. So that's how I would wet block a hat to keep the ribbing from stretching. But even if I was doing this flat, I would still squish that ribbing in and really coax it to dry in a like tighter position. It'll remember that. Blocking's kind of amazing in that sense. I hope that little hat demo made some sense. I'll show you how to block my ribbed hat next. But I really want to free up this Pikachu to show you steam blocking. So this lovely Pikachu, he has a few like little neck wrinkles. I don't know if I can show this to you. Come on. I'm trying to see it there under his chin. It's hard to see, kind of in around his chest area. That was really funny. And I want to block that out because it's undermining all the beautiful hard work that my stepmom did making this Pikachu for my daughter. So I'm just spreading it out. And what you do with this one is there's two ways to do it. I prefer to put a pile of water in my crumb iron, and I am not touching this because if you know what happens to acrylic is that it's just going to melt and I'm going to get gunk stuck on this and I'm going to ruin my piece. So what I usually do is I hover. So I would have this filled with water, set to high steam, and then I would just be about an inch and just press the heck out of it. And the steam would travel from that 1 inch down to the piece. And it's amazing. You can actually see acrylic relax. And all the stitches just kind of soften up and melt in place without compromising the nice structure of the fiber. If I push on it in any capacity, then I'm going to definitely flatten the top of those lovely stitches. And it's going to look like I've kind of like mangled it a bit. Even using a towel on it can be an issue because the fibers of the towel combined with the heat can inadvertently leave imprints. Kind of like, you know, how, I don't know, if like a crayon gets too warm, you can dent it with your fingers. And then when it cools, the dent is permanent. It's the same thing with acrylic. It's very suggestible while it's warm or hot. And if you let heat plus some kind of surface touch it, it's going to change the shape of it. So instead, what I do is fill this with water and steam the heck out of it without touching it. And you will actually see your acrylic just relax into place. It's going to be very hot. I tend to like let it cool for a good minute before I would flip it and work other parts of the garment. I use this on Lion Brand Thick and Quick. I use this on Uptown Worsted, Uptown Sport, anything that has like a really high acrylic count. I highly recommend steam blocking without touching. It's kind of like a hover. You're just like press, 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 steam's coming out. It's super crazy. And if you have your eyes on the prize, you can see the magic happen down there. So that is another reason to steam block is if you're working with acrylic. Wet blocking is almost pointless. It will contribute a little bit to it, but overall, acrylic is a type of plastic and it's going to be resistant to water. It's not going to absorb it. There'll be water around those stitches, but you know, you almost need to use warm water to do it. So that's how you would block this Pikachu. I don't want to put that in my iron right now. So that is my little steam blocking demo. Now I want to get back to this hat. You guys ready to see that? Okay. So what I have here, here's my hat. I'm looking at it. Even though this has been blocked a few times, the water is pretty gray and filthy. And some of that is still residual dye. Some of it's just the wear and tear. And what I'm doing is I'm just trying to gently get out the excess water without harming any of the fibers or any of my stitch work. Get this out of the way. Wish I could show you. I don't know if I can see that. Can you see how gray it is? Yeah, it's kind of gross. That's good. That means my husband's been working hard while wearing that hat, doing things for Stash. Thank you, Dale. Thanks for blowing the leaves out front. And now I take my dry towel and I spread my item out. I want to maintain the ribbing. So what I'm doing is I'm actually squishing the ribbing. My hat can actually go like, I could block it. So it's this big, like freaky deaky. I don't want that. I want this to like squish onto our head. So instead I'm going to encourage the ribbing and length, push all the ribbing together, coax it into place so that it seems like about the same length, like that. And then I like to wrap it up in the towel, and I'll even gently roll it like a burrito. Because really, I just want it damp. I don't want it soaking wet. And the more water we can safely remove now is the faster, means that it'll just dry faster. There. Now I'm going to unroll it. And what I would do at home is I would then transfer it to a drier towel. Look, it even left a little like ribbing print. Do you see that? That's a good sign. And then I would transfer it to a drier towel, coax it nice and tight. And I would let that dry for a solid, probably 48 hours, because it's a pretty thick double rib hat. And then I would just turn it over maybe one day. If I really am concerned, I could flip it again. But see, it's starting to already want to bell out. So if I put it down and don't disturb it, then that brim of the hat is going to stay nice and crisp. So I'm just going to put that down in a safe place and let it dry. So that's wet blocking small garments. What do you think? Pretty good? I hope I'm demystifying a few things for you. I'll give you an example of some other blocking now. I'm not going to block this one, but I want to talk about it. So a lot of us knit shawls. Some of you may have knit a shawl, and you knit it and you're like, well, it's only this big. This is supposed to be a big, beautiful shawl. And quite often the instructions may say something like block vigorously. Who does that? Someone does that. It's I've knit a lot of her stuff. Anyways, it'll come to me. But their instructions always say block vigorously or aggressively. And I'm like, gee, that's so scary. But there's a reason for it. With shawls, we're not trying to maintain a shape. We're trying to open it up so that it has even more drape. If we open up a sweater while we're blocking it, it's going to just get so big on us and it's not going to just puff back into shape. But with a shawl, you have to block it aggressively. And that's where those T-pins often come in. So this is an example. This is an older shawl I made. And what it has is it has one edge. This is one of my knit edges that has no give in it. But the other edges have lots of give. And I would really want to open this up so that it's bigger. See how it really could be a lot larger. And so this is a situation where I would soak it in the wet water for that like 30 minutes to 2 hours. I would carefully squish out all of the water. I would carefully put it in a towel. It may be too big for a towel. Sometimes I have it folded in half and then I'll put another towel on top of it and I'll roll it up Sometimes I'll even step on the towel when it's rolled up in a burrito and get as much water as possible, but you can tell it's just like wet to the core. And that's when I have to block vigorously. So I'm going to move this. We're going to pretend this is wet. And I'm going to show you some pinning techniques, which is probably what most of you are here for, I bet. And you're all been like, about time. Thank you, Heather. Watching me fight with an ironing board on Zoom must not be fun. So take a look here. I'm going to move back. Well, okay. So I just have to open up some T-pins because I couldn't find mine. These come in a nice little container too. I'm a big fan of that. So I'll even just stick a few around. In fact, I couldn't find the T-pins for Stash, and I bet that they're literally here, stuck into a foam piece somewhere in the store's basement from the last time I blocked something, because I often don't even put them away. And here I am in this pickle because of it. So put your T-pins away. Don't be Veronica. Work smarter, not harder. And take care of those T-pins. So I have a few in place. This is exciting. There. So I want to give you a little bit here. Yeah, you can totally see it. There. So I will often use an edge of my blocking mats to help determine the straight edge that I want. And I will often pin the side with the least amount of stretch first. And that's because I'll know what size it's going to be, because there's not much to be done about it. So I am not pinning right to the edge. That's how you get those little pointy bits and that kind of like loopity shape that you don't want. I like to go in about 1 centimeter, and I like to leave at least 1 centimeter to 1.5 centimeters of T-pin sticking up. I am not pushing the head of my T-pin down. That is going to distort my work. Am I zoning in there? So this T-pin head here is going to inadvertently leave a dent if I push it all the way in. So you want to leave your T-pin sticking out about 1 centimeter, 1.5 centimeters. I'm just going to put a few across the top. I'm not going to do the whole thing. I like to start from the center and work outward, and it lets me like start aggressively pulling it. And I'm going about 2 to 3 centimeters in between. If you feel that it is going to get distorted, you have to just put more T-pins in, or use those knit blocker comb things. That would be a good example. So I have, between my 2 fingers, I have T-pins put in. I'll give you a close up in a minute. And what I'm doing is I just want to see how far down, look how much more I can open this up. It's going to grow. It's going to grow like a solid like 6 to 10 inches with my Vigorous blocking. So now I'm going to pick my point. I like to decide where the point is. Sometimes a pattern will even tell you the dimensions of it, and you can aim for that. If the pattern gives you some dimensions like finished, your finished size is, you know, like a 6-foot wingspan by 4.5 feet, and you're like, well, I am 5'2". I'm 5'5", and that is gigantic on me. So I would not necessarily block it according to instructions. I would maybe block it a little smaller. I'm in charge. So I'm just going straight down. And again, I'm going a couple inches in, and I'm just going to give it a spot. So I could theoretically start blocking this. And so if you see, if I put a pin here, I'm going to get a scallop. So I'm going to show you some scallops. Scallops are great if you're aiming for that effect, but if you're not, it can be a real bummer. But first, what you have to do is choose a few spots. Some people like to use a straight edge. That's fine too. I wouldn't use a wire blocker on this situation because I I just don't, it doesn't have like lace in it, so I don't have to worry about that perfectly even scalloped edge. What I'm trying to do is just get it in place. Oh, do I have a mistake? Did I hook it? What's that? This is ancient. This is literally, I knit this probably in 2016, 2017, maybe 5 years ago. Still looks great. And I've probably only like washed it maybe 2 or 3 times. I know I spilled a coffee on it once. That's another example. Fun fact, the second time you block something, it often doesn't need the same vigorous blocking. This one just hasn't been washed in so long that I feel like it's just kind of shrunk back to its original shape. So we're going to pretend I did the full triangle. Can you see the scallop? Yeah, that sucks. You don't want that, right? So you got to just pin the heck out of it. And remember, we're pinning away from the edge. We're not pinning right at the edge. You're just going to get more scallops. I'm pushing it out the way I want it. If this doesn't look super fantastic, it's because I have an audience and I'm, yeah, please. If I didn't like to block a shawl, 100%. Great question. So was it Mary? Yeah. Mary asked, if I didn't know I could block this vigorously, can I go back and reblock it? Yeah, absolutely. Open that puppy up, especially if there's lace work. Lace, you're like, you knit it and you're like, lace is ugly. And then you block it and you're like, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. So quite often we don't block our lace very vigorously. Some people will even dry block their lace like this. And then they will put a wet towel on it and steam block it. And the T-pins can handle that as long as they're stainless steel, right? And they can kind of just hold things in place. So yeah, I'm at like every inch here to keep it on point. And then if you're like, oh, this one sticks out too much, just adjust it. And you keep working on your piece. And that's how I would block vigorously. Like you wouldn't even say this is the same piece. It's going to be twice as big. And I'm just going to hold it up and show you the difference. Look at how much I've opened it up there. So yeah, if you have a shawl and you're just like, oh, it doesn't look like everyone else's shawls, it may not be blocked vigorously enough. So that is how I would pin with shawls. I want to talk about blocking a sweater. You guys ready for that one? Any other shawl questions? Oh, you know what? I even have one. Where is it here? So it's hard to see, but something's going on. I have some weird thing going on. Oh, so hard. It's opposite. Up, there. Okay, you see that? That sucks. No one's going to notice it but me, but it's going to bother me for the rest of my life. I'm sure you can relate. So if you ever have a situation on a sweater or a shawl, maybe you made a misstep with your lace work and the error is a lot more glaring when you start blocking it, you can go in with your T-pins and coax the stitches around it a little more and try and fix it. Or if something is skewed, so if you did a bit of lace and maybe you fell out of rhythm by one stitch and all your lace just kind of like went, and you don't notice until you're stretching it out, you can go in with your pins and try and coax it so that it's not as obvious. I would do that. First, I would do the entire shape, and then I would take a look at the garment and go, okay, does anything need like some bossing around? Someone asked, how do you keep things from being too pointy? Well, I've already mentioned one step, which is to pin in a little in further, not the very outer edge. And also, if there's like a point, man, T-pin it up. Like, make that the shape you want it to be. You don't have to adhere to whatever shape it is. You don't like the way a stitch is, take that pin out and move it until it works. As long as you're not sticking them in all the way, you're good to go. You can really get a lot of crazy shapes out of this. So if you have a shape that's scalloped, some people measure in between the scallops. Some people will just do, they will always pick up the same stitch every single time, and they kind of have a rhythm. So consistency is key, especially if you're trying to make like open work or lace work, or even things like cables and stuff really shine. You have to start looking at the pattern. Like you'll see here, this is kind of like a weird wave shape. That's because it's not pinned all the way. And one of the things I would do after is I would move it around until my lines, I would shuffle it once it's in place. Let me move mine. I would coax it and push it and make it do what I want it to do so that the lines are looking really good and that it isn't too distorted. I hope that made sense. Yeah.
Is superwash yarn an issue for blocking shells? I'm currently making a blanket slash throw and finding superwash software to be quite stretchy.
Yeah, that's a great question. Superwash does block very differently from non-superwash yarn. So non-superwash yarn has not gone through a treatment that prevents it from felting. So non-superwash yarn has its natural crimp in it. The fibers all are covered in like barbs that kind of like look like little diagonal cuts along the edge of a tube. And what happens is it means that if it's ever in hot water and cold water, it'll grab its buddies and catch and stick and felt a little bit. That can be an advantage for certain items when you're blocking them or you're wearing them, because it means that that wool is going to always want to, every stitch is going to want to grab onto its mate nearby. It's going to, like, all the pals will help each other out. Superwash yarn has been treated. So it's still 100% wool, if that's what the label says, or a wool with a little bit of nylon or polyamide in it. And but the surface of it has been treated in such a way with a chemical wash that the barbs are removed or dulled or filled. And what that means is that it's just a bit more slippery. It's not going to grab its fellow stitches around it as much, which means it's not going to maintain its shape, and it's more likely to just grow a little bit because it just doesn't have the catch that it needs. So if a pattern calls for a non-superwash yarn, especially if it's a garment, not a blanket, but if it's a garment and you use superwash yarn on a non-superwash pattern, you may struggle with gauge, and you're going to want to make sure that you do a gauge swatch first and do a wet block of it, and then find out how that yarn behaves during a wet blocking, because you may find that it gets bigger by like inches, even just on something that's small. So you could end up with like a sweater that if you knit the gauge up and didn't wet block it and use that gauge as your measurement, it will fit great, and then you'll block it and it will grow and your sleeves will be over your hands and you'll have to fold them up, and it's just heartbreaking and disappointing. So it's really important garment wise, if the pattern is non-superwash, proceed with caution if you want to use superwash. If a pattern is written using superwash yarn, then theoretically you should be set to use either superwash yarn or non-superwash. It's kind of like a one-way street. With a blanket, you may find that it does grow because it is not catching onto its fellow stitches as much. So for example, this one here, I'm stretching out really nicely. It's all superwash yarn. So I can actually like open it up really well. But yeah, so you will find that you're not gonna want to block superwash items very aggressively unless it's a shawl or something that requires you to open it up. If you want it to maintain the shape that it is, I'm going to show you how to do that. I hope that answered some of your question, and I'm going to keep on it. I'm going to move on from this here. So I want to show you, where am I going to put this? Can I just hand that to you? Thank you. Okay. So what I have here is a sweater. So I have this sweater, it's never been blocked online. I think it has been blocked. But we're going to pretend it's never been blocked. And it's very stretchy. It's made out of something that has a little bit of acrylic in it. And I know that it's going to grow when it's wet. So when I put this in the water and pull it out, it's going to just start dragging. The weight of it is going to pull it around. And I don't want it. This thing fits me perfectly. And I do not want it to grow anymore. And so what I'm going to do is I'm not actually going to block it in front of you, but we're going to talk through it. What I'm going to end up doing is soaking this for 20 minutes to 40 minutes, maybe an hour and a half in my kitchen sink. I'm going to have all my towels handy. And then when it's done, it's going to be this heavy, soppy mess, and I don't want to distort it. So I'm going to pick up as much of it as I can. Again, it's going to just be dripping everywhere. I have to try and squish it until it's no longer a hot, drippy mess. Well, cold, drippy mess, really. I'm getting all the water out of it. And then I'm going to lay it on a towel, probably 2 when it's a sweater. And I'm going to put it down and I'm going to start scrunching it in. So what can I do to demo that? Yeah, I think so. Thank you, Heather. You're the best tech ever. Heather's the best. So let's pretend it's on the towel. What I would do is I would avoid stretching it in any way. What I would do instead is just lay it out so it's a natural flat. And the sleeves I would want to match. So what I would do is I would kind of coax the sleeves into a nice soft place like this while it's wet. I would want this nice and straight. And the only time I would use a pin and pin it down on a piece of foam is if I wanted to maybe like keep it in place while I measure the sleeves. I would measure my sleeve from the same point on each side. The point is irrelevant as long as you choose it. It could be armpit to cuff, or it could be like neckband to cuff. I would measure one, take a look, compare it against the recommended measurements for your sweater pattern. Sweater patterns should always have like a finished size that they're recommending. And if it feels like it's too long, you can actually like push it so that it's more crunched and shorten it like that. If it's too short, you could theoretically kind of like coax it so that it's longer. Just doing what I did gained a couple centimeters on one edge and pushing it all back, I actually lost probably a centimeter or 2. I'm also wanting to make sure that, you know, these nice lines, I would brush them back and forth so there's no like wonky bits in it. And I would kind of work that way through the whole sweater. So I'm not pulling it into place. I'm kind of just coaxing it. And I want to keep all those stitches as close to its buddies as possible. And then, you know, as I wear it, it will stretch out a little bit. So I would end up with this giant sweater laying down. I would also want to look for symmetry. So you'll see there's a symmetrical pattern here, and I'm blocking it, and it has this open piece. Can you see how it's crooked? Yeah, that'll stay crooked unless I fix it. So what I need to do is lift it up and flick it around like pizza dough and better hold those points and coax it into place and then kind of give it just a little spread. And I'm just working the surface. And then the trick is once it's in place, again, unless there's a problematic area that I'm trying to correct, like, you know, maybe this happens to everybody at least once, I feel, is maybe your raglan sleeve, your raglan edge took a 1 stitch to the left and it has this kink in it. You know, like you miscount a stitch and it all moves to the left one and then you continue on. You can coax that out during blocking and pin around it. But for the most part, if I don't have a problem like that to fix, I do not pin my blocked sweater ever. Superwash or non-superwash, I don't even pin it down. I'd sooner let it just work on the surface of whatever it's drying on. And if it wants to contract a little bit while it's drying, I'm fine with that. I probably learned that lesson during the gauge swatch. But yeah, I don't pin my sweaters out unless I really have to make it behave. I usually just do some measurements. The pattern may tell me what the chest size needs to be across, and I would measure that against what the pattern says. The pattern may tell me what the bottom opening needs to be, length of sleeve from armpit, And I would just aim for that symmetry so that when I'm wearing it, I don't have one sleeve down lower and the other one's like up by my wrist bone or something like that. So, and it is a bit of personal preference. But yeah, with that superwash sweater, you're going to want to definitely like coax it in, not out, and let it bone dry. And hopefully it like continues to suck in a little bit and flick it into place. And the only time you want to block a sweater aggressively in any way and really force it out is if you're like, yeah, I feel like I've tried it on, it's far too small. I need it to be like a few more inches on the chest. And then you could, while it's wet, really boss it around. And if you're worried it's going to shrink in, then you could pin. I would pin like a whole inch inward from that piece. I wouldn't pinch near the edge. You'll see weird puckers. I would be putting pins in like a solid 2-3 centimeters. So yeah, with sweaters, Heather, I don't know, do you do it differently?
I will often use walking line as a template to get a straight edge for a seam.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I pin sometimes just to make sure things are the same length.
Okay.
We do have a question about from Alicia. What fibers grow more than others when wet blocked?
Great question. Fibers that grow more than others when wet blocked. Superwash, 100%. It can grow more. You have to just treat it differently and approach it a bit differently. Cottons can grow a lot as well, just because they're not springy the way wool is, and they're a lot more like dead weight and more suggestible. And so cottons and linens can really open up with blocking if it's something you're looking for. If it's something you're not looking for, again, it's more of the squishing in and letting it dry and set in place versus the pushing it out. Those are the two big ones for me. Silk can grow, but it can also be very fragile. Another one you want to be careful with when blocking is things that you have held 2 strands at a time. So for example, like sometimes patterns ask you to use a mohair alongside a fingering weight or DK weight. And when you're putting T-pins in for a shawl, or if you're trying to coax a sweater into a certain shape, you really want to make sure that you're catching the right pieces and that you're not just catching the weaker piece, like the mohair strand, because that core can feel very strong and rigid, but when it's wet, it can probably be really compromised. And you could inadvertently break one of the two and start finding that you have a mohair kind of run going on, whereas the rest of the garment is stable. Or if it's just thin, like if you're knitting like a beautiful mohair lace piece, you're going to want to block that very carefully. If you wet block it, you're going to want to really treat it delicately, make sure it doesn't get hooked on anything. Because when it's wet, if it got hooked, like even on like my denim button on my jeans, something like that could literally snap off if it got caught up there. So, wear an apron maybe. I've never done that, but the one time I don't warn you, it's going to break. So yeah, I think that certain things do open up more, definitely those cottons and super washes. And it's just a matter of being tuned in and paying attention to it. Yeah. Now let me check my notes, okay? How are we doing here? What time is it? Oh, is it? I'm way over time. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up, everybody. So what I want to do is I'm going to go over a few little questions here. I've talked about running. Oh, how do you block brioche? Great question. I like to wet block brioche as long as it's knit with something that's worsted weight or smaller. And what you're doing with brioche is you're not pinning it open, you're smushing it in like my hat. You're trying to maintain the fluffiness, not open it up, because brioche will naturally open after it's dry when you're wearing it. Let's see. When to wet block for steam done, certain way to stretch or pin. Somebody had a question about getting a tailored classical look to knitting projects. So it's a little bit blocking related, but step 1 for a tailored classical sweater, you want to choose sweaters that are probably knit in pieces. They tend to have more structure than a top-down raglan or a bottom-up raglan. And you also may want to pre-block your pieces before sewing them together. And you want to really nail those finishing techniques for a true classic look. That's my best tip there. Best practice when blocking swatches. Should you stretch it a bit or lay it flat? Lay it flat. I do not stretch my my gauge swatches unless they have open work in them. If it's for a sweater, I want to lay my sweater flat to dry, so I want my gauge swatch to be very similar. Let's see here.
There's a question about remodeling.
Alpaca. I don't have any specific tips on alpaca. It may take longer for alpaca to dry. Yeah, it's a deader fiber, more like silk, so it can be more delicate. But if you're using a fingering weight plied alpaca, up to a worsted weight plied, like, you know, two things plied together, then you can open it up as much as you want, or you can squish it a little more so that it doesn't like grow on you. So you want to treat it more like a superwash, I guess. Yeah. Let's see, how do you keep a square from getting pointy at the pinning locations? I kind of touched on that. It's all about you like really going to town on using those pins. I do find my one problem with T-pins is that there's never enough in that container. I tend to buy two personally. Different yarns requiring different methods. Do you have to block every item you knit? No. I actually don't block hats very often unless I found that the yarn felt kind of gritty or dirty while I was making it. A good gauge sometimes is if your hands or your needles get like dye on them while you're knitting or crocheting with it, you're probably gonna want to block it. It's kind of like, you know how when you have jeans and your hands turn indigo or you realize that color's transferring, that can happen with fiber too. That stuff's not clean when we get it. It's gone through a huge process. It's been handled dozens of times by different people and thrown in boxes and fallen off tables and gone through either a commercial process or an indie dye process. So the theory is that if you wash it, it's going to be cleaner for the person who's going to use it. I tend not to block mittens. I might steam block them to get the color work in place, but for the most part, they're about to go through like heck and back. So I don't put too much effort into that. I don't always block scarves unless something in it, I really want to emphasize the design of it. Can you block socks without sock blockers? Yeah, you can just lay them down to dry and coax them into place. They're not going to look all crisp and stuff. You could also steam block them as well to like really push those stitches into place if you want. We do have those wire blockers that I've managed in this place. Oh, thank you. I like these the most. I like the wooden ones a lot too. They're super cute and photogenic. These are not as photogenic, but they're more utilitarian because they let a lot of air flow through and around. You have to make sure, again, stainless steel. You do not want a giant rust line along your socks. These are pretty fun. They really make the shape look good, and they theoretically do make your socks last longer. I have also made them out of like coat hangers. So I have just bent coat hangers into the proper shape that I want. This part's never as long, but it's something you could try on your own. I used those for years before I actually bought a set, and I own a store. So you don't have to buy them either if you don't want to. And we talked about how not to stretch a brim out on a hat. So put it in a balloon. Balloon should be smaller than you think, and squish that brim in. Or if you're putting it flat to dry, coax the brim or any ribbing on like the cuff of a sweater, coax those in more. They'll stretch as much as they need to after it's dry and you're wearing it. Let me check the last ones. How to manipulate size when blocking. I kind of touched on that a little bit. It's all about pushing it out if you need it bigger, squishing it in if you want it closer. So are there any other questions, Heather?
Yeah, there's a question, like, do you ever hang socks to dry?
Yeah, I actually hang them over the back of a chair sometimes. I don't tend to knit like regular thin socks though. I tend to knit like Newfoundland socks, like vamps out of like worsted Aran weight. They're more like slipper socks to me. And when I wash those, I hang them over a chair to dry just like that, because they're gonna go on my feet or in my rubber boots or something like that. So there's no right or wrong way. Washing them, you have to do it. And the key is to just make sure you do it gently so that they dry and they have good shape. Any other questions?
Now we have a comment saying that they're no longer scared of blocking.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. We got a comment. You're no longer scared of blocking. I hope that this free blocking session has helped you. I only covered some of the aspects of blocking, but the main thing is if you're not blocking, do it. Try it out. And you can always ask our team at Stash for more assistance with blocking questions that you may have, and assistance with picking out any supplies that you might want to add to your toolkit at home so that you can be successful. Blocking is like the step that takes something from looking homemade to handmade. It's just like next level stuff. And it really gives it a finished look, and it'll make you even more proud of the garments and the objects that you knit and crochet. So thank you everyone for joining me. I would love to continue it on, but I got to let Heather get back to work and I got to get on with my day too. So I hope you all have a wonderful Sunday, and I want to thank you for spending Sunday morning with us at Stash. There we go. Have a great day.